So I just want to go over a couple things that we should know for our Industrial Revolution, early Industrial Revolution quiz. One of the things that we should know, of course, we should know a little bit about the early beginnings of it. Terms to be familiar with, you should know about the Enclosure Movement. You might remember that this was something that happened in England. And what happened in England was that it used to be that the land was openly owned, corporately owned by many different individuals. Common people had access to the land. You could actually graze your animals, you could access the land, and wealthy people in England actually decided to bring that to an end. They closed the land to common people, and as a result, common people couldn't support themselves as farmers anymore, which meant that they had to move to the cities. So we see a rise of urbanization at this time, and that means they're working in very difficult situations, often working in factories for the first time. That's the Enclosure Movement and the impact it had on the Industrial Revolution. They're moving to cities. They also remember that these people brought their their farm ways with them. They often were not used to living in these situations. They threw waste out the window, and we see a degradation of the urban environment for many reasons, including some of the unhealthy habits these country people brought with them. We also saw, number two, that new foods from the agricultural revolution, this is one of the things that allowed the population of Europe to begin to skyrocket and having all these people looking for jobs flooding the cities. We found that two new crops actually changed the life of the poor in Europe. That would be corn and potatoes, as these are very high calorie foods that can be grown easily and that can endure. Because of that, that's one of the factors. The population of Europe begins to increase, more workers looking for jobs, and the Industrial Revolution has a place for them all to go. Number three, the most common and profitable crop grown in the Caribbean that led to slavery. Of course, the crop of all crops is sugar. It's because of sugar we see African enslaved labor. If there wasn't sugar, there would not be that. And so we see incredible wealth being produced at this time, credible demand for products at this time. Number four, what European nation had the Industrial Revolution first? And that should be what were some of the reasons for it starting there. Well, we've talked about this. You know, the Industrial Revolution, you should know if it started anywhere, it started in England. A couple reasons for that. We saw the population growth that there was, with potatoes and corn. The population of Europe in general, England in particular, was increasing. And with that, well, we've got tons of young people. We mentioned 40% of Great Britain was under age 15. This means that we have to do something with these kids. It led to child labor. We were putting these kids in factory situations. We also saw in England that they experienced not just this population growth, but we saw these agricultural revolutions, the cities growing because of new crops. We also saw the expansion of trade in England, that England was now in a global market because of colonization, that there is ever increasing demand for sugar and ever increasing demand for textiles. We know that the agricultural revolutions even spread because of the knowledge being spread through technology like the printing press. So four different things that led to the Industrial Revolution in England: population growth, that increased demand for goods. Number two, the agricultural revolutions from potatoes and corn. The number three, the expansion of trade with colonization and sugar and textiles, all these different things happening. And number four, that Britain was very open to experimentation and innovation. Again, the printing press is going to allow information and articles about farming methods and new types of crops to be able to make an impact. Also, we see that Britain not only had these, but we also, you might recall, they used and had access to joint stock companies. They had a stock market. They had access to banks and insurance. You might remember that in England and Europe in general, they also had a patent system where your property rights were protected. This will be a theme we'll talk again much later. Britain also was more socially fluid than the other European countries at the time, and also had a natural and abundant source of coal and iron. So these are just some of the things that allowed England to lead in the Industrial Revolution. We talked about five. What nation had the most social mobility? England would. That means just because you're born poor doesn't mean you die poor. In fact, there's this group of people called the bourgeoisie, people that are born poor but work their way up into wealth. Number six, new sources of energy in the Industrial Revolution. Well, the big thing, of course, is steam. With the Industrial Revolution, we're not depending on animal power or human power, but steam power. And that's a big deal. This is going to really be a game changer in the Industrial Revolution, where we are now able, with coal, to be able to run our factories independent of anything before. Independent of the wind for windmills or water for water wheels. We can actually, with steam power, run these machines, these factories 24 hours a day if we wanted to. Also, division of labor. You might remember division of labor. We are breaking up jobs into specialized and repetitive tasks. While before it would have taken a craftsman to make pottery and pots, it would have taken, before the Industrial Revolution, someone with like specialized knowledge. Now, with machines, with the division of labor, you do one job. It's a simple job. You have really no skill set beyond that. And because you have no skill set beyond this repetitive specialized job, I don't have to pay you a lot. Now, the beauty of this, though, may not be great for you. You don't get paid a lot, but the price of goods goes down. In fact, this allows for mass production. One of the areas that we first saw mass production was pottery. And it used to be that you could only get high quality pottery from places like China, and the price being very high. But you know what? The more that I produce something, the more it's available for just regular, ordinary people, and the price actually goes down. Now, we also saw the price of not just pottery go down, but clothing, because we had mentioned and seen that it took hours and hours and hours and hours of labor to make a single pound of textile of cloth. But now with these new inventions like the spinning jenny and the water frame, these were things that allowed the rapid production of textiles, of cloth. It was machines doing the work instead of a human. And you know what happens as we have machines doing this instead of human labor? Well, number 10, the impact of prices, because of industrialization, prices went down. And so now Europeans are able to buy more stuff at cheaper prices, whether it's pottery or clothes. Europeans were able to have a consumer culture. Number 10 is prices went down. Number 11, the invention of Eli Whitney. One of the inventions mentioned at the time was the cotton gin, Gin. And you might remember that removed seeds from cotton. People grew cotton, but as soon as we were able to remove this, it made it actually more profitable to grow it, as the seeds could be mechanically removed. And that's great because it's going to make the process of making clothes cheaper, but also, not only will it make it cheaper, but also it's going to increase an evil institution, the institution of using enslaved Africans. And so prices go down with clothing, more people began, or it becomes easier to grow it, so more people begin to plant it. People make a lot of money, but as the cotton gin makes cotton more widespread, the price does go down, make it affordable, but demand goes up incredibly, and so does the institution of slavery. Number 12, the role of coke. This is not a beverage, it's a type of coal, a high quality coal that they found out we have a lot of coal and therefore a lot of coke available in Great Britain. And it allows you to get to really high temperatures quickly, which means I can literally melt iron. And that's good because I want to melt iron to take out the impurities. I want to actually later use a purified iron to make steel for construction. And we see that iron also used to be something really, for the most part, as a percentage, something we got out of China, but now we can make it ourselves, and construction skyrockets as a result. Number 13, James Watt, his biggest contribution is the steam engine. Of course, this is going to transform labor from depending on animal or human power or wind power or water power to now the power of steam, as this steam turns turbines and not only changes the amount of pottery and textiles, but it literally changes the world. In fact, 14, for steam power, it revolutionizes transportation and communication. Railroads link the world. It limits how it makes it insignificant the time it would take to get a message from England all the way to India. We had said it had taken, years originally, and then steam power made it months originally. But with the electronic advancements of the telegraph, we see this changing incredibly. We see transportation changing with steam engines helping us go all around the world. And then later in the Industrial Revolution, communications changed with the telegraph, where I can communicate in mere minutes from England to India. Number 15, parts of the world that benefited most from the Industrial Revolution. It turns out the West. It turns out that India never really went through an Industrial Revolution, and they hurt because they were making money by making textiles by hand. But now England is going to be mass producing what they used to make by hand. If I'm mass producing it, the price goes down. And that means it doesn't make sense for white Europeans to purchase these products from India anymore at high costs. China never fully modernizes, making them be left behind. And some countries try to modernize, but don't do it at the rates and the speed they need to keep up with Europe. Really, Western Europe is the part of the world that benefits the most from the Industrial Revolution. Number 16, urbanization and negatives for the poor. Well, it turns out again that the conditions were very poor. They were overcrowded, they were overworked, they were polluted. People were not living in these best conditions, and for sure, their work conditions weren't any better. You might remember we saw a video of the Triangle Shirtwaist Company fire, where girls were literally locked in their workplace and over 100 burned alive. The conditions were not ideal for the poor. Water pollution, so much air pollution that people got rickets, a disease from a lack of exposure to the sun. And it says also, number 17, the role of women and families. Women were one of the most common people who worked in these factories, these textile factories. It required very little, relatively less physical labor to run these massive machines. And so women were often in these workplaces. And it was often just like all women except for some men. Or sometimes it would be all children and a few men. But regardless, we see families separated. Men are working with other men. Women are in places just with all women. Children are working with all children. And so the family is now all at work. The family is divided and the family is separated. These women at work also, we saw, made up to half of what men made. And so they're working, they're being taken advantage of, they're separated by gender. Men work with men, women work with women, or they're separated by age as children, getting paid, underpaid conditions, and working with other children. It says on the handout, the Industrial Revolution, the middle class, they really benefited the most. Remember, the bourgeoisie, the middle class, they are the ones who are not born rich but become rich. And man, there is a lot of wealth to be made in the Industrial Revolution, and the middle class benefits the most. It says on the handout, the role of middle class and stay-at-home women. There's now that I'm making a lot of money and I'm middle class and my wife can stay home, she doesn't have to work, there's a term we talked about called the Cult of Domesticity. And this is basically a set of expectations for women, that women they expected are running the home. They're in charge of decorating and making it nice and attractive and impressive. They're in charge of the children, and whether, even if that means not like themselves raising them, but hiring the staff to raise them, they're in charge of that. In charge of the husband's social calendar. And so there's these roles that women are supposed to do, these things to bring prestige and honor to the husband. And you might remember that some people didn't agree with this. There was one woman by name we studied named Mary Wollstonecraft. And you might remember she rejected this middle class expectation. And as an early feminist, she argued that the only thing keeping women from being equals was a lack of education. And Mary Wollstonecraft, like other classical liberals at the time, thought that education was key, different opinions could be tolerated, that you don't have to agree to realize that education is a great equalizer. So Mary Wollstonecraft rejected that kind of traditional role of the middle class woman, as she was what we would refer to as a classical liberal. Another classical liberal is Adam Smith, who argued in his most famous book, The Wealth of Nations, that capitalism was a good thing. In Wealth of Nations, he believed in something called laissez-faire, which means that the government should not get involved with business. In fact, he argued for something called the invisible hand, where he said that you don't need burdensome government regulation. Some regulations, fine, but in general, the businesses should be left on their own. And he said that it's not truly on your own because there's an invisible hand guiding the process where poorly run businesses are going to go out of business and well-run businesses will thrive. He was, again, very much against government intervention. And there was one great example of the government getting involved that he wanted to get rid of, which was mercantilism. You might recall that mercantilism was this economic philosophy where you, as a mother country, have colonies with one purpose, and that's to make you money. In mercantilism, the colonies must sell to you only as a mother country, like France or Britain, and you, the mother country, France or Britain, get the right to sell to the colonies, and they're not allowed to do anything else. That's called a monopoly, and it turns out monopoly means very little choice, and Adam Smith said we need more choice, and choice without the government telling me who I can't and can't buy from. So less government is better for Adam Smith in capitalism. There's few people that say more intervention is important, and that includes Malthus. Malthus was very well known that he believed that the biggest problem was overpopulation that led to poverty. And this was something that we should be guarding against and checking. In fact, maybe population control would be appropriate. Another example of people who want more government, not less, is the philosophy of positivism, which says that if your government is backed by science, that the government can intervene and solve social problems. So we need not a less involved government, but a more involved government. I do want to take a time here to point out that the perhaps biggest example of positivism, of getting the government involved, is Karl Marx's Communism. You might remember that Karl Marx argued in his book, Communist Manifesto, that sometimes the rich will not cooperate, and we have to literally overthrow the wealthy bourgeoisie. We need to stand up for the proletariat or the working class. And sometimes we need not just a powerful government, but a government that is so powerful they're willing to redistribute the wealth. Number 23, Europe's relationship with China. Well, it had been one with a negative trade balance for a long time. There's a change over time that occurs because Europe was kind of a beggar compared to China originally before 1800. Europe wanted and desperately paid high prices for Chinese projects before 1800, but the Industrial Revolution changed all that because Europe modernized, Europe industrialized, Europe's militaries got better, but China never went through an industrial revolution, and so China was left behind. Because of this, European ships that showed up to do business in China had power on their side. They had steam power that allowed them to go up rivers, to have the focus on science, allowed their guns to be better, their cannons to be better. And really, Europe, instead of bowing down to China, humiliated China because Europe modernized and China did not. 24, realizing the importance of modernizing, there's a man named Muhammad Ali. And Muhammad Ali, he desperately wanted to modernize Egypt and North Africa. He wants to copy the Europeans by making Egypt more modern, developing guns and business and industry. This is very much something that he was interested in doing. And the thing about Muhammad Ali in his time running Egypt was that he wanted independence from Europe, but that's something Europe would not allow. In fact, Great Britain would interfere and intervene to try to make sure that he would not be able to do these changes as easily as he wanted. England did not want him to become powerful. They did not want him to modernize, because to modernize Egypt means you are less likely to be manipulated by the British. So Europeans actively, in some cases, try to undermine attempts at modernization. Finally, the British in India. Again, Britain had a subservient role for a long time in India, but that changed over time. With the British now mass producing textiles, they began to bring cheaply, quickly machine-made products to India. And so what's going to happen if you have a choice between, on one hand, some woman on her own making products by hand, or machine-made products made by the thousands? Of course, the one that's cheaper is the machine-made products by the thousands. And now Europeans are bringing clothing to India at cheaper prices, and that's going to drive out Indian business. Europeans are the beneficiaries of the Industrial Revolution. Their economies will grow and thrive. India will fall to this process of industrialized growth and power in Europe. China will fall to this industrialized growth of European power. And Egypt, despite its efforts to modernize, will fail to actually thrive independently when Europe has grown as a result of the Industrial Revolution. So that should be about it, and I hope that was helpful in any way. Good luck. We'll see how you all do.